I'm going to begin this with a story that isn't very technical at all. It's the first year I moved here. In the fall, I wanted to do a little contesting, and Worked All Europe was on that weekend, so I set the weekend aside and went down and turned on the radio and worked the 2 European stations I could hear, DR1A and somebody strong TM something, TM5, what's the last of that?
TM5A probably.
Yeah, I thought there might be more to Worked All Europe than 2 stations, and I knew conditions were kind of bad at the bottom of the sunspot cycle, but I heard all these Americans calling Europeans, and I didn't hear any Europeans, so I got in the back of my truck, and I drove up to the top of Cattle Creek, and I took a 100-watt FT 857 on a battery, and I stuck a car end-fed 33-foot wire antenna, and I worked about 500 Europeans in a string from the back of the truck at the top of Cattle Creek. And it became obvious to me that my wife had chosen a very nice house along the river, and it had a beautiful view up in every direction at these gorgeous mountains, but it was a pretty crappy radio location. And sort of from then on, I realized that I was going to be fighting that location, doing anything with the radio, and eventually got to the point where the depression came through and lowered rural land values enough that I could get a little spot of high land south of Silt and set up a radio station on the hill. And up there I could put up anything I want at a pretty interesting location because it was surrounded by cliff in every interesting radio direction, so that radios on short towers sitting on the side of a cliff, or antennas on short towers sitting on the side of a cliff might think they're a lot higher than they were. And everything worked pretty well up there, even off those little crank-up masts that we use at field day. Hex beams were kicking butt, but I never really had a sense of how much better things were. I knew that Phil, who lives right near there, was always able to hear and work stuff that I couldn't hear from Carbondale, and he and I could have traded signal reports, and sometimes we did, but that wasn't a very good sense of how much better it was. I certainly knew that for big contests it was worth the drive down there. But the technology's evolved in the remote enough to the point where you can buy off-the-shelf gear that works pretty darn well. And I finally got motivated this fall to try a remote setup, and the gear had just come at the day of the last meeting. Come the day before, and I had gotten it working in my room at home, where I could have a radio on one side of the room, internet connected to a microphone on the other side of the room, and I was able to send and receive and control the radio, and that was pretty cool. But I was a long way away from having a true remote station, and Pete and Eric came by and spent truly till dark playing with internet settings, and we got the thing working to where we could get it up in the cabin and run it from Carbondale or run it from any place. And I'll describe that setup in a second, but I guess the place to start is that I was astounded to find out how much better one location is than another. I'm able to now sit at my desk in Carbondale and have one microphone and radio and speaker on the left of me and one on the right of me, and the one on the left is hooked up to the hilltop in Silt, and the one on the right is my best antennas and my best radios in Carbondale. And I can dial the same station, and I can watch the S meters for 2 stations. I can call somebody, and you know how you hear Ham saying, can I have an antenna check, antenna 1 and antenna 2? I can do station 1 and station 2. Here's what I'm astounded by. The difference on a European signal from Silt to Carbondale is 4 to 5 S units, which is at 5 S units and 6 dB an S unit, that's 30 dB. The difference between a 100-watt radio and a 1500-watt alpha amp is 12 dB. So the difference we're talking about in my signal getting to Europe, 100 watts off the top of the hill is worth running 2 alphas out of Carbondale. But of course, amps don't help you on receive at all. You can hear a station that's 5S units weaker from the good location versus the bad location. A really good antenna of anything other, that any of us would have except for Phil, would be about 10 dB a gain. So the location trumps good antenna by 3 times. Which says that a whole lot of us are able to use our radios and have fun with them, but we're fighting an uphill battle when we live in these valley floors. And for me, a good solution has been to find a way to access a hill. Our repeaters are on hills. We're all surrounded by hills. We have access to hills. I think over time, a bunch of us are probably going to be moving our transmitting to those hilltops, and so we're happy to start to share with the group what we found about doing that. The setup that I got is through a Swedish company called Remote Rig, and in its simplest, basic conceptual format. I don't know if you have any pictures.
Yes, I
of
do.
This stuff.
Yeah.
You have your. Here's the simplest remote can get. You have a detachable front panel radio, like a FT 857 or a Nikon 706 or any of those radios that were made for mobile use, where you put the front panel up above your visor in your car and you have the real radio part in the back someplace. You take the front off one of those and you attach it to one box. You take the back and you attach it to another box. And you have the 2 boxes talk to each other on the internet. And as I was saying to Pat, you can literally turn on the radio front on your desk and have the radio turn on wherever around the world. And you can talk into the mic and come out of the radio wherever around the world. That's the easiest remote setup. And what it requires is one of those generally inexpensive radios. Those are about the best value radios there are. If you take it one level more complicated,
Right, and then how expensive are the 2 boxes, the interface?
$500 for the pair. So, and those 2 boxes and an internet connection in both locations are all you need. To take it a step more complicated, you don't have a detachable front panel radio. You have there's a group of radios, the Elecraft K3 being one, where you can have one in one location, one in another location, and the one acts as the master and the other one's the slave. And you can even buy a Elecraft K3 for $700 that has no real working radio parts. It's just the appearance of being a radio that runs the other one. And there's some Yaesu combinations like that. There's a few radios that work like that. Next step up is you have what I have. It's a little bit more complicated. I didn't have to buy anything to get there, and it lets you have antenna A and B choices. It lets you have an antenna tuner in place. Some of the things that the detachable front panel radios, at least the ones I have, don't have, is I have a Kenwood TS590 up on the hilltop, and I run it. The microphone and the key are down on the other box, and we run it on computer control with a Kenwood software program that they make and give away with the radio that lets you do all of the control the frequency, run the antenna tuner, all the control of the radio.
I have pictures of all this.
Yeah, I got very lucky having that radio. It's not the only one, but it's kind of a magic radio as a affordable radio that has this wonderful software for it. So we're going to demo that today. The 2 boxes I have work perfectly. They also make a little dongle where all you do is plug this and it replaces one of the boxes and it goes into your computer, and it doesn't work right yet. And so Pete and I are wrestling with the Swedes on that. Last bit of technical stuff, and then I'll let Pete talk about what he really did. You can have these two boxes just talk to each other. If you set up something called a VPN, virtual private network,
Very good.
all your boxes, wherever they're located and whatever your number of locations, all think they're sitting right next to each other. And the computer guys, Eric and Pete, installed that for me, so all my boxes are even more easy to access and control. So that's the remote rig solution. And it costs you about $500, and it's really bulletproof, and it does CW better than any other solution. You just plug your key into it, it has about a 20 microsecond delay factor in your CW, which you can't even hear. I work a lot of DX on that. That's a wonderful solution. We're also going to show you another solution that requires buying nothing if you have the right radios. And
That's my solution.
that one's actually working better for not being in one fixed location talking to another fixed location. And so that's going to probably be pretty appealing, and it's also what we're able to show and actually show and tell here. So that's my story.